Hello, I am Xarkun and this is World of Warships Legends. Today I want to talk about the premium Tier 7 German destroyer ZF-6, which is the reward ship for the ongoing campaign. This destroyer is unique among German destroyers because it doesn't have sonar, but it does have a main battery reload booster. It's also gigantic, and much like the Paolo Emilio, Khabarovsk, Tashkent, Kleber, and several other destroyers, you could almost look at this one as sort of an ultra-light cruiser without a citadel. So let's talk about it. We'll go over my mod selection, commander build, and then jump into some gameplay, examine the ship stats, and talk about how it plays. So first up, the mod selection, Aiming Systems Mod 1, Propulsion, Concealment, and then the Torpedo Reload mod. These mods and the camo will affect the stats that I list a little bit later on in this video. My commander is Eric Bay, with William Sims and Anton Gurin as his inspirations. Sims increases the ship's hit points. Gurin gives a penetration multiplier to the destroyer's armor-piercing shells, and that, I think, is significant in this particular ship and German destroyers generally. As for the gameplay, well, I've got two games for you. The first one is on Dos Hermanos. The reason I've got two games, I initially only did two games with the Paolo Emilio review because that ship is quite unique and basically unlike anything else. This one is a little bit more like a conventional German destroyer with some different seasoning, I suppose, in the recipe. But also, I just have a tough time getting good games at the start of these updates because it seems like a lot of the potatoes are out. By the way, you remember how I said this ship is gigantic? Take a look at it in comparison to this Z-23, which itself is not exactly a small destroyer. It's even bigger than that, so in some ways, this thing really is like an ultra-light cruiser without a citadel. Let's start with the stats, though. It's got 17,000 hit points at base. With the William Sims inspiration, I've got that number up to 19,240, nearly 20k. Pretty beefy hit points pool for a Tier 7 destroyer. Certainly not bad at all. It has 5 main guns. They are 128 millimeters in size. They have a 10.8 kilometer range, a 4-second reload, and an 18-second turret traverse time. Now, with Twist and Track on Bay, I've got the reload down to 3.7 seconds, which is fairly quick. I think really the only things quicker than that at Tier 7 would be something like the Fletcher and the Akizuki. And the turret traverse with Twist and Track, because remember, Twist and Track also decreases the turret traverse time, is 14.2 seconds, which is slightly more manageable than 18 seconds. As far as what these guns do, the HE Alpha Strike is anemic. It's actually very, very low and not very good at all. 1,450 is the HE Alpha Strike, and it has a 6% chance to start fire, which is pretty low, but keep in mind, 6% chance with guns that reload in roughly 4 seconds. The Fletcher also has 5 guns. They're 1 millimeter smaller. They reload in roughly 3 seconds, and they have a 5% fire chance. So really the fire chance is right on par with a fast-shooting, lightly armed destroyer, something like the Fletcher. It's just the HE Alpha Strike is really underwhelming and not very good. The AP Alpha Strike, on the other hand, is ridiculously good, 2,950. And in my opinion, the AP on this ship is the bread and butter. It is by far and away better than the HE. In fact, I would recommend you shoot AP in almost all circumstances, except for perhaps destroyers that are angled enough to bounce your AP shells, or at battleships that are bow onto you and you want to hit their superstructure and maybe cause fires. Now, I am switching to the HE on this Shimakaze, and you can see just how little damage it does. So I switch back to the AP, and you can see I'm getting a lot more damage with it on the Shimakaze than I was with the AP. couple thousand per salvo with the AP. With the HE, it was maybe 1,000, maybe a little bit over. So the AP, I think, definitely more effective on this ship. And we'll have some examples, maybe not in this game, but certainly in the next one, that'll give you a good idea of what the AP on these guns can do. As far as the torpedoes, let's see what they can do as we launch them at this small cluster of battleships over here to the right of our ship, or to the starboard side if we want to use the correct naval terms. The ZF-6 has 8 torpedoes in 2 quadruple launchers that fire off either side of the ship. They reload in 76.5 seconds with the torpedo reload mod, so that is quite a quick reload time. They have an alpha strike of 18,400, which puts them on par with French torpedoes. And also like French torpedoes, they have a relatively short range at 8 kilometers and a 75 knot speed. So these are very quick torpedoes. They're very hard hitting, but they are somewhat short range. And they are also pretty conspicuous as well. 1.8 kilometer detectability by sea. And actually, we'll pause for a moment before we continue talking about the torpedoes and just take a look at peppering this Georgia's superstructure with the armor piercing. You can see that it's doing a hefty amount of damage. It's getting upwards of 2,000 per salvo sometimes, maybe even a little bit more on the superstructure of that unangled battleship. And even when he angles a little bit, we're still getting nice penetrations. I think that the ZF-6 might actually have improved penetration angles on its armor-piercing shells. I am not 100% sure that that is the case, but the penetration on these shells does seem to be pretty excellent. Although, to be fair, that could be the Xarkun inspiration helping things along. Although Xarkun is not going to improve the angle at which these shells penetrate. If they are penetrating more steeply angled targets, then that has to do with the shells themselves, and that is not something that Xarkun can give you. As you can see, though, this game is wrapping up. We're clearly going to win it. We've done 110,000 damage, most of that with our torpedoes. And yes, back to the torpedoes, very hard hitting, very fast, very quick reload time. And in fact, it may be the case that you might want to choose a more torpedo-focused commander for this destroyer. Now, obviously, I went with Eric Bay, and that has to do with his base trait, which is one of the most valuable base traits on any commander for destroyers in this game. You all probably know what it does, but it decreases the destroyer's detectability. And so having that inspiration, or having that base skill on Bay, is almost like having 3 inspirations, I suppose you could say, because Bay is somebody that you're going to use on a lot of destroyer commanders, and if you do choose a more torpedo-focused destroyer commander for the ZF-6, like Von Spee or Blue Furiora, for example, then you're probably going to end up using Bay as an inspiration, and so it's nice to just use him on this ship. Of course, he doesn't really have too many skills that are focused on torpedoes. He's more of the sort of gunboat-style German commander. But I like this build for the ZF-6, and I think it works well. Let's talk about the ship's AA stats briefly as this first game winds down. It's got an overall anti-aircraft defense rating of 53, and it's got I guess a good amount of anti-aircraft guns, but fairly mediocre DPS, damage per second, on all of those guns. So I don't really think it's an anti-aircraft destroyer in the way that something like the Fletcher or maybe the Gearing would be an AA destroyer. They have some effective AA. This one, not so much, and I think for the most part, most destroyers don't. Again, we see another great example of the armor piercing at work against the broadside of Yamato. So many shells hitting, the majority of them penetrating. We're getting very few shatters. We're actually even getting some over penetrations in addition to the regular penetrations, and we're up to 120,000 damage. Most of that climb done with our guns after the initial big alpha strike punch of the torpedoes. So, yeah, anyway, moving on, we still haven't finished all of the stats. This destroyer travels at a rather pedestrian speed of 35 knots at its top speed, but it does have the engine boost consumable. So there is that. It also has a smoke screen. No sonar, though, unlike many German destroyers. Instead, it gets a main battery reload booster consumable, and if I'm being totally honest, I haven't really used it too much at all. I've used it a few times against destroyers, shooting AP at them in order to buff the results of those salvos, and I've used it a couple times shooting AP at the broadsides of battleships, just to see how much I could do. But I feel like destroyers at this tier with, these reload boosters for the main battery, I don't know what the rationale is for why they only get one of them. I know on the PC, a lot of these destroyers, which would be equivalent to, I think, Tier 8 destroyers on PC, if they have main battery reload boosters, they tend to get a couple more than two. Of course, the PC game does have more ships per match, and the matches are longer, but I think if you're going to put a main battery reload booster consumable on a destroyer, this destroyer, or Le Fantasque, or Kleber, I think you should put at least two instead of just one. Otherwise, it sort of seems like a one-time, not very useful gimmick that you can't really incorporate so much into your gameplay, and I really haven't found many opportunities to incorporate it. The guns load very quickly, though, and when you do pop that main battery reload booster, they fire very, very fast indeed. In fact, I think when we come up against a destroyer at the end of this game, we might actually use that main battery reload booster. In any case, 35 knot top speed on this ship, not very fast at all. That's sort of on par with British destroyers, but it does have the engine boost consumable, unlike those destroyers. It's also got a 670 meter turning circle, which is tight enough. Doesn't feel like this ship takes too long to turn, and given its gargantuan size, honestly, 670 meters on the turning circle sounds pretty good to me. It's also got a very responsive 3.9 second rudder shift time, which I think is pretty excellent, especially considering, again, how big this ship is. Concealment, too, surprisingly, with the camo and the concealment mod, 5.9 kilometers, and I've got that down to 5.2 with Bay, which is, I guess, depending on your point of view and what kind of destroyers you play, either very, very good or just sort of mediocre acceptable, you could say. So what do I think of this ship? Well, it's interesting. In some ways, it's a hybrid gunboat torpedo boat, much like the tech tree German destroyers are, in my opinion. But the bread and butter of this ship truly is the armor piercing. And if you need more evidence of that, watch this next sequence here. We start off this sequence capping this Bravo cap with 0 damage done, and we've got an Iowa and a Vanguard out there, roughly 10 kilometers away from us. We're trying to make sure we remain undetected, so we wait for the Vanguard to go behind that island. When we are sure that they're no longer able to spot us, then we open fire again. We did 7,700 damage to that Iowa, and both of these two battleships continue to sail away as we continue to hit their side here with our armor-piercing shells. And right now we're up to nearly 20,000 damage in the span of just a couple of seconds. We'll see how many shells we actually fired at the end of things here. And I think that is all of the shells there. So how many did we fire? 36 shells at the broadside of two battleships, 21,000 damage done. So extrapolate. You could extrapolate that if you were in a situation where you were, say, concealed in smoke, and you had even more time and more access to the broadsides of a number of battleships or cruisers, and you use this AP against them, well, you could rack up this damage pretty quickly. If you want to add on that main battery reload booster for a one-time boost of DPM or DPS, whatever you want to call it, then I suspect the damage that you could put out to broadside battleships or cruisers with this armor piercing would be definitely nothing to sneeze at. It would actually probably be pretty horrific. So the AP on this destroyer is very good, and I think I do recommend Anton Gurin as an inspiration for Bay and for this destroyer, and really the German line generally, because the AP on these destroyers is really pretty good, and in my opinion, I think you should probably be shooting the AP most of the time, and then only switch to HE in situations where your armor piercing either is going to shatter or ricochet. So, unlike most destroyers, I almost think AP is the default shell type on this ship. But on the other hand, it's got very, very fast, very hard-hitting torpedoes that reload very quickly. And you definitely can and should incorporate that, or those torpedoes, rather, into your gameplay, because they are highly effective. The only downside of this ship, really, in my view, is that it doesn't have the sonar like the German tech tree destroyers. But unlike the German tech tree destroyers, I almost think the armor-piercing shells have improved penetration angles or something like that. They seem to be better than the typical tech tree German destroyer AP. Not that that AP is bad, but this stuff is a little spicier. Take a look at this Moss out here. We're going to shoot AP at him, and I can't remember, are we going to use the reload booster? No, we're not, but we're going to start smoking up now. Moss goes down, not to our hands, but we've got an Iowa, and I think a Vanguard is going to be pushing into us as well. And we'll see the value of this quick torpedo reload in action now, too. You can see I'm shooting at the Iowa bow on, and my shells are shattering or ricocheting, at least, yeah, almost all of them are. I think, in fact, all of them did. So only now do I switch to the HE. We get lucky and immediately light a fire, which the Iowa puts out. And, of course, you can see that we're getting a good deal of shatters against the Iowa who is bow onto us. But we are doing a little bit of damage, and having a chance to light a fire is always very nice. We do manage to tag him on the bow with a single torpedo. Unfortunately, it does not cause flooding, but he is turning exactly the way we predicted he would turn, and now he's going to take 2 torpedoes, and that'll be the end of him. Of course, that last torpedo, the last 2, do cause flooding, but it doesn't matter because he's dead. And now the Vanguard is pushing in, along with another battleship. I can't quite tell what it is, but we're going to try to do the same thing to these guys, and our torpedoes are nearly reloaded. But our smoke screen is nearly gone as well. So this smoke screen consumable on this destroyer is the typical German smoke screen. Not very long lasting, honestly kind of mediocre. Unfortunately, during that time, the enemy ZF-6 managed to sneak up on us. And while he's shooting at us, you can see, take a look at his HE and the amount of health we are losing. It's really, really not a lot, despite the fact that he is shooting rapidly at us and he's hitting us quite a bit. He really hasn't taken away too much of our health, honestly. And that is, like I said, because the HE on this ship honestly kind of sucks. And this is why I say you probably want to use the AP a little bit more. Getting out of a hairy situation, though, we did not fire back at any of these ships with our guns because we didn't want the firing penalty imposed on our concealment. Since we elected not to fire, we were able to remain undetected. The Vanguard, I think it was, went down. That just leaves the Iowa and the ZF-6 left. You can see why I've chosen 2 games, by the way, because both of these were pretty short, pretty blowouts, and that's how the games have honestly gone for the first week of this update. But as we wait for this Iowa to die and for us to reacquire this ZF-6 once again, I'll say that I like this ship. I think it's good. I think it's a unique kind of ship in that it's a very AP-focused destroyer, and I think it's very good at being a very AP-focused destroyer. Plus, the super fast torpedoes with the pretty good alpha strike doesn't hurt either. You can definitely play this without shooting too much at all and just using the torpedoes and have a tremendous amount of success. But the fun in it, for me, comes with the armor piercing. And you can see that this ZF-6 is fairly angled, and we're shooting AP at him, he's shooting HE at us. We are winning the contest in DPM, although we do have a cruiser supporting us, to be fair, so maybe that wasn't that great of an example. But I think that covers pretty much all I wanted to cover on the ZF-6. Again, I like it. I think it's a fun ship. I think it's an interesting ship. It's certainly a ship for which I will be buying the Admiralty backing and completing the campaign. And if you like German destroyers, this definitely presents something a little different, a little bit of a different play style for the German destroyer play style that you may be used to. So I hope you enjoyed it. If so, give the video a thumbs up. Let me know what you think of the ZF-6 in the comments, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I will see you next time. Goodbye.